Good morning and welcome to today's 5-minute message. We are in the book of 1 John. We've been looking at the first few verses of 1 John over the last couple of weeks. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 1 in verse 4. We've been thinking about this fellowship that we have with God and his life with Jesus. Today in verse 4 we're going to be thinking about how Jesus brings us joy. Verse 4 goes something like this: "And these things we write to you, that your joy may be full." Very short verse today. So we're going to spend some time thinking about joy. But not really. We're not going to be thinking about joy very much, actually. Joy is something that is very often misunderstood. Joy is not necessarily something that we can pursue. Oftentimes we think that it is, but I suspect some of the reason for that is because we like to confuse joy and happiness. Happiness is wonderful, but does God really desire your happiness? Does he? Think about it for just a second. Does God really, truly, honestly desire your happiness? No, He does not. He's not super interested in your happiness. Sometimes we're sinning and we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, and God will bring along the old 2x4 and whack you upside the head and try to straighten you out. And it might not make you very happy, but he's going to do it anyway because he's not interested necessarily in your happiness. What is he interested in your life? He's interested in your righteousness. He's interested in your obedience. And this obedience is the key to joy. Joy is nothing more than the byproduct of obedience. If you want to have joy in your life, pursuing joy for the sake of joy isn't how you're going to get there. It's not how this works. Joy is the byproduct of obedience. Think about it for a minute here. Let's say that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing for God's sake. He doesn't want you to lie, cheat, or steal, and all you're doing is lying, cheating, and stealing. I'm going to guess that there's not going to be a lot of joy in your life. You're going to be paranoid. You're going to be anxiety-ridden. You're going to have no peace in your life. You're always going to be worried about who's behind the corner. Will you ever get caught? There's no joy in a life like that. Honestly, there's no joy in a life like that. How do you get joy? Well, as we read Philippians is all about joy. And as you remember, Paul, who wrote Philippians, was in prison at the time. Wait a second. How does somebody who's in prison find joy? Well, as you recall from reading Philippians and thinking about the life of the Apostle Paul, he was always consumed by being obedient to the call of God in his life. In spite of the fact that he was tied up with Roman guards, he was still preaching the gospel to these people, which was what God wanted him to do, to be an ambassador to the Gentiles for sharing the gospel. According to the book of Romans, he's not ashamed of the gospel of God. 1 Corinthians says it's the power of God that brings salvation to people. Paul was doing what he was supposed to be doing in spite of the fact that he was locked up in prison. And his obedience to doing what God wanted him to do was what allowed him to have that joy. He didn't just choose joy just because he just decided to choose joy. He was obedient to God and the plan for his life. And therefore, as a byproduct, he was able to find and experience joy. In fact, at the end of Philippians, he says what he does choose is to be content with what God has done for him. So when John tells us here in verse 4 that we write these things that your joy may be full, he's much more interested in your obedience to what the call of God is for your life than anything else. And that is to accept Christ as your Savior, and there you will find joy. Have a great day.